Before Compo's woolly hat and threadbare jacket, before Last of the Summer Wine made him beloved to millions, Bill Owen was Private William Rowbotham of the Royal Army Ordnance Corps. Standing on a training field when the world erupted in fire and noise, an explosion that would leave him injured, scarred, and forever changed. William John Owen Rowbotham was born on the 14th of March, 1914, in Acton Green, London, to a fiercely working-class family. His father was a tram driver, a staunch left-wing socialist whose political views would profoundly influence young William, and his mother was a laundress who worked her fingers raw to help support the family. They were not poor by the standards of the time, but they were far from comfortable, living in a world where a missed day's work could mean hunger. Young William knew early that entertaining was his calling. He worked odd jobs as a printer's apprentice, and later as a band vocalist, anything to make money while pursuing his dream. When he came of legal age, he started playing drums in London nightclubs and toured music halls with his own cabaret act, using whatever money he earned to pay for acting classes. He entertained at Butlins holiday camps, those quintessentially British vacation destinations where working-class families could afford a week by the sea, and performed in repertory theatre. Eventually, he joined the Unity Theatre, a left-wing theatre company in London where he attained respect as both performer and producer. The Unity Theatre was more than just an acting venue for Bill, it was a political education. The theatre was committed to socialist principles, staging plays that addressed workers' rights, class inequality, and social justice. Here, Bill found not just his artistic home but his political one, surrounded by like-minded performers who believed theatre could change the world. His passion for left-wing politics, inherited from his tram driver father, deepened into a lifelong commitment to the Labour Party and working-class causes. Then came September 1939, and everything changed. Germany invaded Poland, Britain declared war, and the Unity Theatre's productions suddenly seemed less relevant as the nation mobilized for survival. Bill Rowbotham, like millions of other young British men, received his call-up papers. In 1940 or early 1941, he joined the Royal Army Ordnance Corps, the branch of the British Army responsible for the supply and maintenance of weapons, ammunition, and military equipment. The Royal Army Ordnance Corps was not a combat unit in the traditional sense. Its members were mechanics, storekeepers, ammunition technicians, and logistics experts, the unglamorous but essential personnel who kept the British Army supplied and armed. Without the Royal Army Ordnance Corps, tanks would sit idle for lack of fuel, artillery pieces would fall silent for want of shells, and infantry would face the enemy with empty rifles. It was crucial work, but it was also dangerous work, particularly for those handling explosives and ammunition. Bill's service records indicate he served with competence and dedication, though, like many who served in support roles, his name appears rarely in official histories. What is known with certainty is that during a battle training course, sometime in the middle years of the war, Bill Rowbotham was involved in an explosion. The exact circumstances remain unclear, accounts vary, and military records from this period are incomplete, but the result was catastrophic. Bill was seriously injured. The explosion might have occurred during ammunition handling training, or during a demonstration of ordnance disposal techniques, or possibly during a live fire exercise. Whatever the cause, Bill found himself thrown by the blast, his body battered, his hearing damaged, possibly suffering from concussion and shrapnel wounds. He was rushed to a military hospital, where doctors worked to save his life and assess the extent of his injuries. Bill survived, but he was changed. According to some accounts, he spent weeks or months recovering, enduring painful physical therapy, learning to cope with permanent hearing damage. The explosion had come close to killing him, and the psychological impact of that near-death experience stayed with him for life. He had enlisted hoping to serve his country and survive the war, and now he carried permanent reminders of how close he had come to dying in a training accident, not even in combat. Following his recovery, Bill was deemed unfit for continued service with the Royal Army Ordnance Corps and was discharged from the military. Some accounts suggest he may have been invalided out, given a medical discharge due to his injuries. He returned to civilian life in the mid-1940s, still healing, still processing what had happened to him, wondering if his dreams of an acting career could possibly survive the trauma he had endured. But Bill Robotham was nothing if not resilient. He returned to the stage almost immediately after demobilization, taking roles in repertory theater and rebuilding his acting skills. He changed his professional name to Bill Owen, dropping the surname Robotham in favor of something shorter and more memorable. He appeared in minor roles in post-war British films, starting with The Way to the Stars, 1945, in which he was credited as Nobby Clark, using his birth name, Bill Robotham. His performance, though small, was noticed. Throughout the late 1940s and early 1950s, Bill Owen slowly built his career, taking whatever work he could find. He appeared in Easy Money, 1948, The Astonished Heart, 1950, and numerous other films, usually in supporting roles as working-class characters. His authentic London accent, his understanding of working-class life, and his commitment to portraying ordinary people with dignity made him valuable to filmmakers seeking authenticity. In the 1950s, Bill became a regular in early Carry-On films, appearing in Carry-On Sergeant 1958 as Corporal Bill Copping, Carry-On Nurse 1959, Carry-On Regardless 1961, and Carry-On Cabby 1963. While these roles were often small, they kept him working and raised his profile. He also appeared in Carve Her Name with Pride, 1958, as an NCO Dud instructor, a role that perhaps drew on his own military experiences. During the 1960s, Bill Owen developed a second career as a songwriter. Partnering with Mike Sammes, he wrote songs recorded by Pat Boone, Harry Seckham, Engelbert Humperdinck, and most successfully, Sir Cliff Richard, whose 1968 recording of Bill's song Marianne became a hit. Bill also collaborated with songwriter Tony Russell on The Matchgirls, a musical about the London Matchgirls strike of 1888, which was staged in the West End. His artistic interests ranged far beyond acting, encompassing music, political activism, and social causes. Bill Owen was a committed socialist throughout his life, a founding member of the Keep Sunday Special campaign group and president of Arts for Labour, a campaign group of performers linked to the Labour Party. His politics sometimes caused friction. Peter Sallis, his future co-star, later claimed that Bill's left-wing views contrasted so sharply with the right-wing opinions of actor Michael Bates that Last of the Summer Wine was almost not made because of their arguments. But Bill never wavered in his beliefs, shaped by his working-class upbringing and his father's example. Then, in 1973, came the role that would define Bill Owen's career and legacy. He was cast as William Compo Simonite in a new BBC sitcom called Last of the Summer Wine, created by Roy Clark. The show followed three elderly working-class men in Yorkshire, navigating retirement, friendship, and the absurdities of growing old. Bill played Compo, a scruffy, childlike man in a woolly hat who spent much of his time lusting hopelessly after the formidable Nora Batty, played by Kathy Staff. Last of the Summer Wine became a phenomenon. It ran for 37 years, from 1973 to 2010, eventually becoming the world's longest-running comedy series. Bill Owen appeared in the show from its first episode until his death in 1999, playing Compo for 26 years and appearing in over 200 episodes. The character became iconic, beloved for his innocence, his loyalty to his friends, and his eternal, futile pursuit of Nora Batty. Bill brought depth to what could have been a simple comic character, making Compo both ridiculous and dignified, foolish and wise. For his work beyond acting, Bill Owen was awarded an MBE in 1977, recognizing his steadfast work for the National Association of Boys Clubs and his role as chairman of the Performing Arts Advising Panel. Bradford University awarded him an honorary degree in 1998, honoring his contributions to British culture. Despite his success, Bill remained humble, never forgetting his working-class roots or the socialist principles his father had taught him. In the late 1990s, while filming the Last of the Summer Wine French special for the millennium, Bill Owen fell ill. He insisted on continuing despite being in pain, but when he returned to England, he was diagnosed with pancreatic and bowel cancer. He continued working right up to his death on the 12th of July, 1999, in Westminster, London, aged 85. His final appearance on screen was shown in April 2000, several months after his death. Coincidentally, he died on the birthday of co-star Kathy Staff, who played Nora Batty. Bill Owen was buried in the churchyard of St John's Parish Church, Upperthong, near Holmfirth in Yorkshire, the town where Last of the Summer Wine was filmed. The townspeople had taken him to their hearts over decades of filming, and Bill had grown to love the Yorkshire countryside. When Peter Sallis died in 2017, aged 96, he was buried in the adjacent grave. The two friends reunited in death as they had been on screen. Bill's son, actor Tom Owen, joined the cast after his father's death, and when Tom died in 2022, aged 73, his ashes were interred beside his father. Looking back at Bill Owen's life, the explosion that nearly killed him during the Second World War casts a long shadow. That moment of violence, that brush with death, fundamentally changed the trajectory of his life. The injury forced him out of military service, but also, perhaps, sharpened his appreciation for life, his understanding of fragility, his commitment to using whatever time remained to make people happy. The working-class soldier who survived an explosion became the working-class actor who made millions laugh, who championed socialist causes, who never forgot where he came from. That young private standing in the smoke and chaos after the blast, wondering if he would survive, was already Bill Owen in embryo, resilient, committed, determined to live with purpose and dignity. Before the gentle comedy of Sykes, before decades of making Britain laugh, Eric Sykes was a young wireless operator in the Royal Air Force. Standing at the gates of Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in April 1945, confronted by scenes of horror that no training could have prepared him for, witnessing what human beings could do to other human beings when hatred was given free rein. Eric Sykes was born on the 4th of May, 1923, in Oldham, Lancashire, a mill town in the industrial north of England, where cotton was king and working-class life was hard. His mother died just 3 weeks after his birth, leaving him and his 2-year-old brother Vernon motherless. Their father, a labourer in a cotton mill and former army sergeant, raised the boys alone, a difficult task in an era when single fatherhood was rare and suspect. Young Eric grew up knowing loss from his earliest days, understanding that life could be cruel and arbitrary, that you had to find joy wherever you could. Eric's early education was unremarkable, but he showed an aptitude for technical skills and an interest in radio technology, a cutting-edge field in the 1930s. He took odd jobs, helped support his family, and dreamed of a future beyond the cotton mills. When war broke out in September 1939, Eric was 16 years old, too young to enlist, but old enough to understand that his world was about to change forever. In 1942 or early 1943, Eric Sykes joined the Royal Air Force. He trained as a wireless operator, learning Morse code, radio procedures, and the technical skills needed to maintain and operate radio equipment in the field. Wireless operators were crucial to Royal Air Force operations, maintaining communications between aircraft and ground stations, between different units, ensuring that information flowed quickly and accurately. It was technical, demanding work that required concentration and coolness. Under pressure, Eric's service took him to various Royal Air Force stations in Britain and eventually to the continent as Allied forces pushed into Germany. He was assigned to a special liaison unit, working under a commanding officer who would later become Flight Lieutenant Bill Fraser, a fellow performer. It was in this unit that Eric met Denis Norden and Ron Rich, fellow Royal Air Force servicemen who shared his interest in entertainment. The three young men, Eric, Denis, and Ron, began collaborating on troop entertainment shows. Using whatever materials they could scrounge, they wrote sketches, organized performances, and staged shows for their fellow servicemen. These productions helped maintain morale, gave soldiers something to look forward to, provided brief escapes from the grinding routine and constant danger of military life. Eric discovered that he had a gift for comedy writing, for creating situations and characters that made people laugh. Then came April 1945. The war in Europe was entering its final weeks. Allied forces were racing across Germany, encountering less organized resistance as the German military collapsed. Eric Sykes and his unit were stationed somewhere in northwestern Germany when they received word that they needed stage lighting for an upcoming show. Someone had heard that there was a camp nearby, possibly a prison camp or displaced persons facility, where they might be able to requisition or borrow lighting equipment. Eric Sykes, along with Denny Norden and Ron Rich, drove to this nearby camp to see what they could find. They arrived at the gates to find British Army units already there, having liberated the facility just days earlier. The camp was called Bergen-Belsen. Nothing could have prepared them for what they saw. Bergen-Belsen was not technically a death camp like Auschwitz or Treblinka, where gas chambers operated around the clock. It was something perhaps even more insidious, a place designed to cause death through deliberate neglect, through starvation and disease, and the systematic destruction of human dignity. When British forces had liberated Bergen-Belsen on the 15th of April, 1945, they found approximately 60,000 prisoners inside, most half-starved and seriously ill. Another 13,000 corpses lay unburied around the camp. Eric, Denny, and Ron walked through the gates and into hell. Years later, Eric would write about what he saw, appalled, aghast, repelled. It is difficult to find words to express how we felt as we looked upon the degradation of some of the inmates not yet repatriated. They squatted in their thin, striped uniforms, unmoving bony structures who could have been anywhere between 30 and 60 years old, staring ahead with dead, hopeless eyes and incapable of feeling any relief at their deliverance. Eric and his companions stood frozen, unable to process what they were seeing. They had heard reports of concentration camps, knew vaguely that terrible things had happened under the Nazi regime, but nothing had prepared them for the reality. These were not soldiers or combatants. They were civilians, women and children, and elderly men, systematically starved and worked to death for no reason beyond hatred. The young airmen forgot entirely why they had come. Stage lighting seemed obscenely trivial in the face of such horror. Instead, Eric, Dennis, and Ron organized a food collection amongst their comrades back at their Royal Air Force station. They gathered whatever rations they could spare, whatever food could be found, and brought it back to Bergen-Belsen to help feed the starving inmates. It was a small gesture, inadequate in the face of such overwhelming need, but it was something, a way to take action when faced with the unimaginable. The experience at Bergen-Belsen haunted Eric Sykes for the rest of his life. He rarely spoke about it publicly, but when he did, his usual cheerfulness would fade, replaced by a profound sadness. He had witnessed what humans were capable of at their worst, had seen the logical conclusion of hatred and dehumanization. It gave him a perspective on life that shaped everything that followed, a determination to bring joy and laughter into the world as an antidote to the horror he had seen. When the war ended and Eric was demobilized in 1945 or early 1946, he decided to pursue entertainment professionally. He moved to London in the middle of the coldest winter in living memory, the brutal winter of 1946 to 47, arriving with little money and high hopes. He rented lodgings, expecting to find work quickly in the booming post-war entertainment industry, but by the end of the first week, he was cold, hungry, and penniless. London in that winter was a city of rubble and rationing, where work was scarce and survival was a daily struggle. But Eric persevered. He began writing comedy scripts, first for radio and then for television. By the early 1950s, he had established himself as one of Britain's most talented comedy writers. He wrote for major stars including Tony Hancock, Frankie Howerd, and Tommy Cooper. He collaborated on some scripts for The Goon Show, the revolutionary radio comedy that featured Spike Milligan, Harry Seacombe, and Peter Sellers. Eric's writing was character-driven, focusing on recognizable human foibles and everyday situations elevated to absurdity. In the mid-1950s, Eric Sykes began to make the transition from writer to performer. He started appearing in television comedies, initially in supporting roles. His small office above a grocer's shop at 130 Uxbridge Road, Shepherd's Bush, became a creative hub. Spike Milligan shared the office from around 1953, and together they formed Associated London Scripts. a writers' agency that also included Ray Galton and Alan Simpson. The agency represented many of the biggest names in British comedy and lasted for over a decade. Eric's breakthrough as a performer came in the early 1960s when he began starring in television series alongside actress Hattie Jacques. Sykes, later Sykes and A, ran on BBC television from 1960 to 1965, and then from 1972 to 1979. A total of nearly 70 episodes. The show featured Eric and Hattie as twins Eric and Hat Sykes, living together in a suburban home, navigating everyday disasters with a combination of slapstick and gentle character comedy. The show was hugely popular, making Eric a star. What made Eric Sykes' comedy distinctive was its warmth and lack of cruelty. Unlike much British comedy of the era, which often relied on mockery or humiliation, Eric's humour was gentle, finding absurdity in ordinary situations without mocking the characters. This kindness, this fundamental decency in his comedy, perhaps reflected what he had learned at Bergen-Belsen, that life was hard enough without adding unnecessary cruelty. Throughout his career, Eric Sykes worked with virtually every major British comedian of his era. He appeared in films ranging from comedy classics like The Plank, 1967, which he also wrote and directed, to serious dramas. He continued writing for television and film well into his 70s and 80s, even as deafness increasingly isolated him from the world around him. By the end of his life, Eric was almost completely deaf, but he continued working, lip-reading, and using technology to stay connected. Eric Sykes was appointed an Officer of the Order of the British Empire, OBE, in 2005 for his services to entertainment. He continued performing and writing until shortly before his death. On the 4th of July, 2012, Eric Sykes died peacefully, aged 89. Tributes poured in from across the entertainment industry, with fellow comedians praising his kindness, his professionalism, and his influence on British comedy. Looking back at Eric Sykes' long life and career, the shadow of Bergen-Belsen looms large. That day in April 1945, when a young wireless operator witnessed the depths of human evil, fundamentally shaped the man he would become. He had seen what hatred could do, what happened when people were stripped of their humanity, and he spent the rest of his life trying to bring something positive into the world as a counterweight. The humor he created was deliberately gentle, deliberately kind, an assertion that there was another way to be human, a way based on warmth and laughter and shared humanity. That young airman standing at the gates of Bergen-Belsen, overwhelmed by horror but determined to help, was already Eric Sykes, decent, compassionate, committed to making the world a slightly better place through laughter. Before Stan Butler and the Bus Depot, before On the Buses made him a household name, Reg Varney was Sapper Varney of the Royal Engineers. Sitting at an upright piano in a steaming jungle clearing somewhere in Burma or Malaya, playing for exhausted soldiers who hadn't heard music from home in months, bringing them a few precious hours of normalcy in the middle of hell. Reginald Alfred Varney was born on the 11th of July, 1916, in Canning Town, Essex, now part of the London borough of Newham, into a working-class family that knew hardship intimately. His father, Sidney Thomas Varney, worked in a rubber factory in Silvertown, one of London's grimmest industrial areas, and Reg was one of 5 children who grew up in 27 Addington Road, Canning Town. He was educated at the nearby Star Lane Primary School in West Ham, leaving at the age of 14 to become a messenger boy and later a page boy at the Regent Palace Hotel, typical dead-end jobs for working-class boys. But Reg had a gift. He could play the piano. His parents had scraped together money for piano lessons when Reg was young, recognizing their son's musical talent, and those lessons had taken root. Reg was good enough to find employment as a part-time piano player while still working his day jobs. His first paid engagement was at Plumstead Radical Club in Woolwich, where he was paid 8 shillings and sixpence, 42.5 pence, to sing and play the accordion. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Through his teens and early 20s, Reg played piano in working men's clubs, pubs, and ABC cinemas. He also sang with big bands of the time, learning showmanship and stagecraft, discovering that he had timing and charisma beyond just musical ability. He and his mother decided together that show business was the career for him, and Reg gave up his day jobs to pursue entertainment full-time. In May 1938, he secured a position as a solo pianist at the Windmill Theatre in London's Soho, that legendary venue known for its nude revues but also as a training ground for comedians. In late 1939, shortly before the outbreak of war, Reg married Lillian Emma Flavelle, born 1915, died 2002, at East Ham. The young couple faced an uncertain future as war clouds gathered over Europe. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939 and Britain declared war, Reg was 23 years old, newly married, and facing the prospect of military service. During the Second World War, Reg VARNEY joined the Royal Engineers, one of the oldest and most versatile branches of the British Army. The Royal Engineers were responsible for everything from bridge building and mine clearance to surveying and construction. They were combat engineers, often working under fire, performing the unglamorous but essential tasks that kept armies moving. But Reg's military service would take an unusual turn. While serving with the Royal Engineers, Reg continued his performing career as an army entertainer. The military recognized that morale was as important as ammunition, that soldiers fighting in distant theaters of war needed entertainment to maintain their spirits and their connection to home. Reg, with his musical abilities and stage experience, was a natural choice for entertainment duties. According to various accounts, Reg toured extensively in the Far East as part of military entertainment units. This would have meant service in India, Burma, possibly Malaya, or other parts of the Southeast Asian and Pacific theater where British and Commonwealth forces were fighting the Japanese. The conditions in these theaters were notoriously brutal: overwhelming heat, monsoon rains, jungle diseases like malaria and dysentery, difficult terrain, and an enemy that fought with ferocious determination. Performing for troops in the Far East was unlike any entertainment work Reg had done in civilian life. The audiences were men who had been away from Britain for years, who had fought in some of the war's most savage battles, who had seen friends die from disease as often as from enemy action. They were hungry for any connection to home, any reminder that Britain still existed beyond the jungle and the mud. Reg would have travelled by military transport, often in uncomfortable and dangerous conditions, to reach isolated units. He performed on makeshift stages in jungle clearings, in garrison theatres cobbled together from bamboo and canvas, sometimes simply standing on the back of a truck with a portable piano. He played the popular songs of the day, sang, told jokes, did impressions, anything to make the soldiers laugh and remember home. The tour through the Far East was grueling. The constant travel, the heat, the ever-present threat of Japanese attack, the tropical diseases that laid low even the healthiest men, all of it tested Reg's resilience. But he kept performing, kept bringing music and laughter to men who desperately needed it. He formed friendships with other entertainers serving in the theatre, connections that would prove valuable in his post-war career. When the war finally ended with Japan's surrender in August 1945, Reg had survived years of service in one of the war's most challenging theatres. He was demobilized in the late 1940s and returned to Britain, to Lillian, and to the prospect of rebuilding his entertainment career in a country transformed by 6 years of war. Back in Britain, Reg returned to the stage, starring in a comic revue entitled Gay Time in the late 1940s. His partner in a double act was none other than Benny Hill, another future comedy legend. The partnership was brief but successful, with both men learning from each other and honing their craft. Reg then became an all-round entertainer, working his way around the music halls, the traditional touring circuit that was still thriving in post-war Britain. Throughout the 1950s, Reg made a handful of film and television appearances, but major success eluded him. He was talented and professional, but luck and timing matter in entertainment, and for years, Reg remained on the edges of stardom rather than at its center. Then, in 1961, came his big break. He was cast as Reg Turner, the long-suffering factory foreman in the BBC television sitcom The Rag Trade. The Rag Trade was a hit, and Reg VARNEY became a household name. He was aware that he was the only performer in the cast without West End acting experience, and he worked hard to make up for it, determined to prove he belonged. His portrayal of the beleaguered foreman, trying to maintain order among a workforce of strong-willed women, showcased his comic timing and his ability to be both funny and sympathetic. In 1964 to 1965, Reg starred in a BBC TV show called The Valiant Varneys, performing multiple characters in front of a live audience, demonstrating his versatility. This was followed by another successful sitcom, Beggar My Neighbor, 1966 to 1968, which also starred Pat Coombs, June Whitfield, and Peter Jones. Then, in 1969, came the role that would define Reg Varney's career, Stan Butler, the bus driver in the London weekend television sitcom On the Buses. Stan was a working-class London bus driver who lived with his interfering mother and his sister's family, constantly scheming to avoid work and pursue women, usually unsuccessfully. Reg took considerable lengths to research the role, even taking bus driving lessons and attempting to gain a public service vehicle license so he could be filmed driving a bus on public roads. Though insurance restrictions ultimately prevented this, On the Buses became a phenomenon. It ran for 7 series from 1969 to 1973 and spawned 3 spin-off films: On the Buses, 1971, Mutiny, On the Buses, 1972, and Holiday on the Buses, 1973. The show regularly attracted audiences of over 20 million viewers at its peak, making it one of the most popular sitcoms in British television history. Reg Varney, at age 52 when the series began, played Stan Butler as if he were 35, bringing energy and comic vitality to the role. The success of On the Buses brought Reg international recognition. He toured Australia, New Zealand, and Canada with his cabaret act, finding appreciative audiences wherever he went. In 1970, he was the subject of This Is Your Life, surprised by Eamon Andrews at a London location. He became one of Britain's most recognisable entertainers, his cheerful Cockney persona beloved by millions. Interestingly, Reg Varney was also the first person in the world to use an ATM, automated teller machine. On the 27th of June, 1967, Barclays Bank installed the world's first voucher-based cash dispensing machine at their Enfield town branch. Reg, who lived in Enfield at the time, was chosen for publicity purposes to make the first withdrawal from the machine. The photograph of Reg using the ATM became iconic, a small but memorable footnote in technological history. Reg left On the Buses during the final season, hoping to move on to films and other projects. However, his subsequent work never achieved the same level of success. He appeared in one more film, The Best Pair of Legs in the Business, 1973, and 2 television series. A sketch show called Reg Varney, 1973 to 1974, and another sitcom, Down the Gate, 1975 to 1976, set in Billingsgate Fish Market. Neither series replicated his success with On the Buses, and after Down the Gate was cancelled after 12 episodes, Reg did not star in another television series. He later acknowledged this reality with characteristic humility. Whatever I did after On the Buses, nobody wanted to know about it. But I can't knock the program because it brought me offers to do concert tours in Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. He worked as an entertainer on cruise ships and toured with his one-man show, always grateful for the opportunities his fame had brought him. Reg suffered health setbacks, including heart attacks in 1965 and a more serious one in 1981, followed by a severe viral infection that made it difficult for him to work for 3 years. Despite these challenges, he remained positive and continued performing when he was able. He and Lillian moved to Devon in the late 1980s, settling in the peaceful countryside far from the bustle of London. Lillian died in 2002, aged 92, after 63 years of marriage. Reg, now alone, continued living in Devon, painting local landscapes in oil, many to professional standard. Some of his works were exhibited in London, revealing yet another dimension to his talents. In his retirement, Reg found peace in art and the Devon countryside, though he never forgot his roots or his working-class values. Reg Varney died aged 92 in a nursing home in Budleigh Salterton, Devon, on the 16th of November, 2008, following a chest infection. He was survived by his only daughter, who remained a loving guardian of her father's legacy. In 2016, exactly 100 years after Reg's birth, An exhibition titled Before the Buses was commissioned, celebrating his life and his remarkable career before the television fame that would one day make him a household name. The exhibition reflected the man behind the laughter, the pianist in wartime camps, the variety performer, the artist, and the proud son of Canning Town, whose working-class values shaped everything he became. Looking back at Reg Varney's life, his wartime service as an entertainer in the Far East stands as a testament to his dedication and resilience. That young piano player, performing in jungle clearings for exhausted soldiers, brought moments of joy to men facing unimaginable hardship. The skills he honed during those years, the understanding he gained of what makes people laugh when life is difficult, shaped everything that followed. The cheerful bus driver Stan Butler was, in many ways, a peacetime version of that wartime entertainer, working class, resilient, determined to find humor in everyday life. That sapper with the piano, playing for his comrades in the far eastern jungles, was already Reg Varney, warm, talented, and committed to bringing joy to others. Before the red fez became an icon of 20th century British comedy, before the booming laugh and the magic tricks that never quite worked delighted millions on television, Tommy Cooper was Trooper Cooper of the Royal Horse Guards, a towering young man from Wales who discovered in the dusty camps of North Africa that laughter could be as powerful as any weapon. This is the story of how 7 years of war shaped one of Britain's most beloved entertainers, and how a borrowed hat in Cairo changed comedy forever. Thomas Frederick Cooper was born on the 19th of March, 1921, at 19 Llewellyn Street in Tresyned Caerphilly, Wales. The modest terraced house did not belong to his family. They were lodgers, and when the time came for his birth, it was the landlady herself who acted as midwife, delivering the boy who would one day make a nation laugh. His father, Thomas H. Cooper, was a Welsh recruiting sergeant in the British Army who later worked as a coal miner. His mother, Catherine Gertrude Wright, came from Crediton in Devon, bringing English softness to balance Welsh steel. To escape the heavily polluted air of the Caerphilly coalfields, which threatened the health of every family living there, his father accepted a new position, and when Tommy was just 3 years old, the Coopers moved to Exeter in Devon. It was in Exeter that young Tommy acquired the warm West Country accent that would later become part of his stage persona. At the age of 8, an aunt gave him a magic set as a gift. For hours he sat alone in his room, practicing sleight of hand, perfecting the palming of coins, and learning how to make silk scarves vanish into thin air. Magic became his refuge, his fascination, and, unknowingly, his future. After leaving school, Cooper trained as a shipwright in Southampton, working with his hands to build vessels that would soon carry men to war. He was a giant of a young man, standing 6 feet 4 inches tall, with broad shoulders and a frame built for labor. But beneath the physical presence was a dreamer who still carried that childhood magic set in his heart. Then, in 1940, the call came. Britain was at war, and Tommy Cooper, aged 19, was called up for military service. He joined the British Army as a trooper in the Royal Horse Guards, one of the oldest and most distinguished cavalry regiments in the British Armed Forces. The days of charging on horseback were over. This was a new kind of cavalry, mechanized and modern, built around reconnaissance vehicles, armored cars, and tanks that rolled across the desert rather than galloped. Cooper's unit was assigned to the 7th Armored Division, better known as Montgomery's Desert Rats, serving in Egypt. The name alone carried weight. These were the men who would fight across North Africa, enduring scorching heat, sandstorms that blinded, and an enemy that was relentless and highly skilled. For a young man from Devon who had only ever known green fields and English rain, the endless expanse of sand was both terrifying and strangely beautiful. After initial training in Egypt, Cooper's reconnaissance unit was deployed across North Africa. They worked in close conjunction with armored cars and tanks, moving ahead of the main forces to gather intelligence, probe enemy positions, and relay vital information back to command. It was dangerous work. Reconnaissance units were often isolated, vulnerable, and the first to encounter hostile fire. One day, during operations in the desert, that danger became reality. Cooper was struck by a gunshot wound to his left arm. The injury was not life-threatening, but it was serious enough to alter the course of his war. He lost his Anaone medical rating, the classification that marked him as fully fit for frontline combat duty. For many soldiers, such a wound would have been devastating, a mark of failure or lost opportunity. For Tommy Cooper, it opened a door he had not expected. Unable to return to full combat operations, Cooper was offered the chance to audition for the Army Concert Party, part of the Navy, Army, and Air Force Institute's entertainment division. The Navy, Army, and Air Force Institutes, known universally by its initials but officially the organization responsible for providing recreational facilities and entertainment to British servicemen, ran concert parties across every theatre of war. Their mission was simple: to lift morale, to remind weary men of home, and to offer a few hours of laughter in the midst of chaos. Cooper auditioned. He performed his magic tricks, the same ones he had been practicing since childhood, and something unexpected happened. The tricks went wrong. Cards fell from his hands. Silk scarves refused to disappear. Coins clattered to the floor. But instead of disappointment, there was laughter. Genuine, uncontrollable laughter. The panel of officers watching him were in hysterics. They told him, with warmth and encouragement, that this should be his act. Not perfect magic, failed magic, comedy magic. It was a revelation. Cooper joined the Navy, Army, and Air Force Institute's entertainment unit and began touring military camps and bases across Egypt and North Africa. He developed an act that blended magic tricks with slapstick humor, each trick designed to fail in increasingly absurd ways. Soldiers who had seen too much death, too much sand, too much fear, found in his performances a release. They laughed not at him, but with him, at the sheer ridiculousness of a world where nothing ever went according to plan. During this time, Cooper also discovered another talent. He became the Horse Guards boxing champion, a title earned through strength, discipline, and hours of training in makeshift rings under the North African sun. He was so skilled that he was offered a professional boxing contract, a chance to turn his fists into fortune. But entertainment had already claimed his heart. It was in Cairo, at a Young Men's Christian Association hall during a Navy, Army, and Air Force Institute's concert, that Tommy Cooper stumbled upon the prop that would define his entire career. He was scheduled to perform a sketch that required him to wear a pith helmet, the sun-resistant headwear common to British troops in hot climates. Minutes before going on stage, he realized with mounting panic that he had mislaid the helmet. There was no time to search. The audience was waiting. In desperation, Cooper looked around the hall and spotted an Egyptian waiter wearing a red fez, the traditional tasseled hat of the Middle East. Without hesitation, and with the quick thinking of a man used to improvisation under pressure, Cooper reached out and borrowed the fez from the waiter's head. He placed it on his own and walked onto the stage. The reaction was instant and overwhelming. The audience erupted in laughter. The sight of this towering British soldier, 6 feet 4 inches of awkward limbs and nervous energy, wearing a comically small red fez, was absurd, unexpected, and utterly hilarious. The fez became part of the act that night, and from that moment forward, Tommy Cooper never performed without one. That hat, plucked from a waiter's head in a moment of panic in wartime Cairo, would later be described by historians and critics as an icon of 20th century comedy. It was the visual signature that made Cooper instantly recognizable, the finishing touch on a persona built from chaos, charm, and timing perfected under the harshest of circumstances. Throughout his 7 years of service, Cooper continued to entertain troops across the Mediterranean and Middle East. He performed in tents, in open-air camps, in makeshift theaters cobbled together from sandbags and canvas. Every performance taught him something new about comedy, how to read an audience, how to hold a pause, how to turn disaster into delight. The skills he learned were not taught in any drama school. They were forged in the crucible of war, before audiences who needed laughter more than they needed food. It was also during this time, on a troop ship returning from Port Said, that Cooper met a young woman named Gwen Henty. She was also involved in the Navy, Army, and Air Force Institute's entertainment effort, performing for troops and bringing a touch of home to men far from Britain. They fell in love amid the uncertainty of wartime, surrounded by comrades who did not know if they would see another year. On the 24th of February, 1947, while still serving in Cyprus, Tommy Cooper married Gwen Henty in a ceremony in Nicosia. It was a hopeful moment, a promise of peace and normalcy after years of conflict. Just months later, on Christmas Eve, 1947, Trooper Tommy Cooper was demobilized. After 7 years in uniform, he returned to civilian life. He was 26 years old. He had no formal training as an entertainer, but he had something far more valuable. 7 years of experience making men laugh when they most needed it. He later developed a popular monologue about his military experiences, a routine he called Cooper the Trooper. It became one of his signature pieces, blending warmth, nostalgia, and humor in a way that only someone who had truly lived those years could achieve. Cooper's first major break came through a musician named Miff Ferry, a trombonist in a band called the Jackdaws. Ferry booked Cooper to appear as the second spot comedian in a show starring the sand dance act Marquise and the Dance of the Seven Veils. It was hardly glamorous, but it was a beginning. What followed was 2 years of grueling, relentless work. Cooper toured Europe, performed in Christmas pantomimes, playing one of Cinderella's ugly sisters, and eventually secured a season-long booking at the Windmill Theatre in London, where he doubled up doing cabaret. In 1 week alone, he performed 52 shows. Ferry remained his sole agent for 37 years, until Cooper's death. Cooper's act was unlike anything British audiences had seen. He was a conjurer whose tricks never succeeded, yet that was precisely the point. Cards flew from his hands. Linking rings refused to link. Top hats collapsed at the worst possible moment. But his timing, his facial expressions, and his sheer physical comedy turned every failure into a triumph. Occasionally, just to keep audiences guessing, he would perform a trick flawlessly, leaving them stunned. He became a member of the Magic Circle, the prestigious organization for magicians, and was respected by traditional practitioners of the craft, even though his performances deliberately subverted their art. Cooper understood magic deeply enough to know exactly how to make it fail in the funniest way possible. In March 1948, Cooper made his television debut on the British Broadcasting Corporation talent show New to You. The response was immediate. His unique blend of visual humor, magic, and slapstick translated perfectly to the small screen. He began starring in his own programs, and for nearly 40 years, he was one of the most popular entertainers in Britain. His television work through London Weekend Television from 1968 to 1972 and Thames Television from 1973 to 1980 made him a household name. Programs such as the Tommy Cooper Hour showcased his incredible range. He could deliver rapid-fire one-liners, perform elaborate physical comedy, and create moments of genuine surrealism that left audiences both baffled and delighted. By the mid-1970s, thanks to his many television shows, Tommy Cooper was one of the most recognizable comedians in the world. His towering frame, his red fez, and his distinctive West Country voice became symbols of British humor. In 1969, he was voted Independent Television's Personality of the Year, recognition of his impact on the nation's cultural life. Yet, behind the laughter, Cooper struggled. He was a heavy smoker, consuming up to 40 cigars a day, and his drinking became increasingly problematic. By the late 1970s, alcohol had begun to erode his professionalism. Club owners complained that he arrived late or rushed through performances. He suffered from chronic indigestion, lumbago, sciatica, bronchitis, and severe circulation problems in his legs. On the 22nd of April, 1977, while performing a show in Rome, Cooper suffered a heart attack. It was a warning, a signal that his body could no longer sustain the pace he had maintained for decades. 3 months later, demonstrating the resilience forged in the deserts of North Africa, he was back on television in Night Out at the London Casino. By 1980, however, Thames Television decided not to offer him another starring series. Cooper's Half Hour was his last regular program. He continued to appear as a guest on other shows, working with comedians such as Eric Sykes, but the era of Tommy Cooper as a leading television star had quietly ended. He and Gwen had 2 children, Thomas, born in 1956, who became an actor under the name Thomas Henty and sadly passed away in 1988, and Victoria. From 1967 until his death, Cooper also maintained a relationship with his personal assistant, Mary Fieldhouse, a complexity in his personal life that remained largely private during his lifetime. On the 15th of April, 1984, Tommy Cooper was performing on the London weekend television variety programme Live from Her Majesty's, broadcast live from Her Majesty's Theatre in Westminster, London. 12 million viewers were watching at home. The host, Jimmy Tarbug, was backstage, hidden behind the curtain, passing props to Cooper as part of a sketch. An assistant had just helped Cooper put on a cloak. His last words, spoken to that assistant seconds before he collapsed, were, "Thank you, love." Then, in front of the nation, Tommy Cooper suffered a massive heart attack. He slumped backward against the curtain. The audience, conditioned by decades of his comedy, laughed. They believed it was part of the act, another piece of physical humor from the master of comic timing. Even as he lay on the stage floor, the laughter continued. It was only when the production crew realized that Cooper was not moving, that this was not rehearsed, that panic set in. The broadcast cut to an unscheduled commercial break. Backstage, frantic efforts were made to revive him. Paramedics arrived, but it was too late. Tommy Cooper was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at Westminster Hospital. He was 63 years old. The news shocked Britain. Tributes poured in from across the entertainment world. Comedians, magicians, and millions of ordinary people mourned the loss of a man who had made them laugh through good times and bad. His funeral was held at Mortlake Crematorium in London, and his ashes were scattered in the back garden of the family home, over his favourite daffodils. There are memorials to Cooper, his wife Gwen, and their son Thomas at Ocklinge Cemetery in Eastbourne, East Sussex. In 2008, a statue of Tommy Cooper was unveiled in his birthplace of Caerphilly. The ceremony was led by Sir Anthony Hopkins, himself a Welshman and a lifelong admirer of Cooper's work, who served as patron of the Tommy Cooper Society. Tommy Cooper's legacy endures not only in the laughter he created, but in the story of how he found his calling. In the deserts of North Africa, a young soldier with a magic set and a borrowed fez discovered that humor could be an act of service, that laughter could be a gift as valuable as any medal. The war taught him timing, resilience, and the importance of never taking himself too seriously. When he returned to Britain in 1947, he brought back more than memories. He brought back a mission to make people smile. For nearly 4 decades, he fulfilled that mission with every failed trick, every booming laugh, every ridiculous gesture. From Trooper Cooper to television legend, from the battlefields of North Africa to the stages of London, Tommy Cooper proved that sometimes the greatest magic is simply making someone forget their troubles for a moment and just laugh. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to Cinema Peak for more true stories from the wars that shaped our world.